Maybe I'm just heartless. Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelf because maybe she's born with it, maybe it's a need for content. Today I want to talk about Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. Let's just take a moment, I'll show you the cover. That's what it looks like. Da-da-da-da. This is the Fairy Loot edition of this book from back when I used to get Fairy Loot, but full disclosure, I did receive an advanced reader copy of this book before it came out for free from the publisher. Regardless, nobody is paying me to talk about books, all opinions are my own. I am keeping this spoiler free, but if you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, click away now because I'm going to give you a plot summary, so on your heads be it. Wicked Fox is the first book in the Gumiho series by Kat Cho. I believe I'm pronouncing that at least vaguely right. I apologise if that is wrong and it will continue to be wrong for the rest of this video. Terribly sorry. The sequel, which is called Vicious Spirits, came out in 2020, but I haven't had a chance to read that yet, so this review is purely for Wicked Fox. This came out in June of 2019, it's urban fantasy, it's also YA. Those are categories that I don't read very often, so if that's wrong or I am mislabeling them, that's on me. Again, sorry. Kat Cho is a Korean-American author currently living and also working in New York City. In case you're an author watching, she also hosts a podcast that's called Write or Die, which is a podcast for authors. And unsurprisingly, she likes to bring in her Korean heritage into her writing. For those who love K-drama, she has a book coming out in 2022, which is called Once Upon a K-prom, which is a YA rom-com. So if you're a contemporary reader, you may enjoy that. This book follows Mi-young, who is a half-human, half-nine-tailed fox spirit. Ji-hun. So it also follows Ji-hun, who is a relatively ordinary teenage boy. Their paths cross when Mi-young comes across Ji-hun being attacked by a goblin, and while helping him, Mi-young loses her fox speed, which is kind of like her soul. And everything just keeps going wrong from there. So we have this story of a blossoming friendship, maybe more, along with this much bigger supernatural threat, all of which is set in Seoul. I really liked the characters in this book. Unlike other urban fantasy I've read, I actually really got along with these two. When I do read urban fantasy, I kind of have to like the characters to want to read it because there's not too much else to keep me interested, it's just not my thing. Both of these characters manage to avoid some of the YA protagonist pitfalls that always annoy me, and neither of them actually becomes either annoyingly perfect or annoyingly naive. I think it helps that both of them are set up as very individual characters, and in different ways, but they're very independent. So we kind of avoid that my parents have kept me hidden from the world feeling that sometimes YA protagonists can have. I also felt like they had genuine chemistry, which is nice, and bodes well for that YA rom-com. I thought that it was nice that the story definitely has a romantic lean to it, but I also felt like these characters could have been friends, which is always nice. You know, I love a story that teaches me about a mythology or a culture that I previously didn't know much about. I hadn't ever really encountered fox spirits coming from a non-Japanese influence, so it was really interesting to see how the Korean stories differ, and obviously I haven't fully gone down the research rabbit hole on that one yet, so I don't really know how much of it's mythology and how much of it's original stuff created by Kat Cho, but she has done at least one video on it that must have coincided with the publication of the first book, so I will link that below if I can find it again, but she did like an interesting piece all about it. On top of that, I thought it was really interesting to read a book set in Seoul, which is not a place I think I'd ever read a book before. I imagine there will be many of them, because if publishers aren't profiting off K-pop, then what are they doing? But yeah, I enjoyed reading a book in a city I'd never been to that I'd never read before. I thought the plot was solid. I won't say it utterly blew me away. It didn't feel totally new and unique, but the elements within the story were well thought out and it had a good flow to it. I think I maybe wanted the threat to escalate a little more. It never felt as dramatic as the characters were making it feel. Everything felt very much like it was tied to the two main characters, so it didn't really feel like it had a wider impact. And if you aren't 1000% on board for these characters, you're kind of like, well, if it only affects them, do I really care? Maybe I'm just heartless. To be fair, that might be it's the first book in a series kind of issue. They have to set up these characters, they have to set up the relationship, so we have to just care about them. I won't know until I read the sequel. I held on to this book through my 2020 book purge because I was pretty sure I wanted to reread it and see if I wanted to keep it or not. Now that I have reread it, I'm not sure it would make it through another brutal book purge. There are some books that I can read over and over again and get something new out of them every single time. This is not one of those books. I didn't feel like it gave me anything new or anything fresh on a second read. That might not have an impact on you, that might not be something that you consider, but I know it affects what format I choose to read a book in because I don't want to buy a physical book and then have to hang on to it for ages, even though I don't want to read it anymore. I think mostly because it's not my typical genre. If it hadn't been a Fairy Loot book and I didn't have a choice in that, or if I hadn't received a review copy, I don't know that I would have picked this up on my own accord and read it. So I probably can't judge it too harshly because it's not a book I would typically read. In some ways that's really good because I got to kind of have this palette cleanser, read a book in a genre I wouldn't normally pick up. It's something very different on my shelves. On the other hand, it's strange to think that if I were making this series a year from now, I don't know if I would be making a whole video on this book. For comparisons, as I say, I don't have many urban fantasy comparisons in my life, but I do have some YA recommendations. Spin the Dawn came up as a, if you'd like this, you might also like on the Goodreads page for this book, so I thought, hey, I can recommend that too. I think it's a good book. For some YA fantasy romance that does lean more heavily into the romance, Sorcery of Thorns is good fun. That was another Fairy Loot book. And then I wondered about kind of the idea of the city being important and thought an adult fantasy rec, it's not the same as this book in any way, shape or form, but the idea of the city being important. Jade City by Fonda Lee is a really good book that you should probably read, regardless of whether or not you enjoyed Wicked Fox. Should you pick this up? These are usually the question I ask myself in final thoughts. I think this is probably a perfect book for some readers. I am just not one of those readers, or certainly I'm not anymore. I have a feeling you'll probably know if this is a book you're going to enjoy. For me, I liked it well enough, it's just not something I want to shout from the rooftops about at the moment. But it's pretty solid. If I were to want to read more urban fantasy, I don't know that necessarily I am right now, but if the urge ever takes me, what should I be picking up? If you are an expert, or if you're just a casual person who enjoys it, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your recommendations. While you're down there commenting, you can follow me on my social media. You can also subscribe, it makes me feel loved and appreciated. I enjoy it greatly. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. Back there you go. Jihun? I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna do the due diligence. Don't know when I'm gonna do another book unhaul. It'll have to happen at some point soon.